You people never know your place." The courtroom fell silent, as if the air itself recoiled from the slur. Caleb Monroe didn't flinch. Standing at the defendant's table, his posture perfect, his gaze steady, his hands resting loosely on the surface, he looked more like an attorney than a man on trial. But appearances in Jackson County Court, Mississippi, didn't protect a black man from the centuries-old shadows still haunting its marble walls. Judge Burton K. Aldridge leaned forward, jabbing a finger toward Caleb like he was ordering a stray dog off his porch. "This court won't tolerate any of your attitude, boy. You understand me?" Gasps echoed through the gallery. A black woman in the third row stood up, as if to protest, but the bailiff's cold eyes made her sit back down. Caleb's attorney, a wiry, nervous public defender named Lyle Jensen, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I respectfully request." "Sit down, Counselor," Judge Aldridge snapped. "Don't try to teach me how to run my courtroom." Jensen sat. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any outburst, because Caleb wasn't there to win a case, was there to collect evidence. 3 months ago, Caleb had accepted a covert assignment from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Rumors had surfaced of a judge in Mississippi, an old white man with deep connections and deeper prejudices who had a pattern of disproportionately harsh sentencing for black defendants. His name was Burton K. Aldridge, and he had a legacy of fear stretching back 4 decades. To expose him, they needed someone who could play the part and walk into the fire without flinching. So Caleb shaved his beard, dropped his credentials, and became Caleb Monroe, a delivery driver charged with resisting arrest after a traffic stop gone wrong. The entire case was fabricated, built with planted evidence, and a willing sheriff's department in on the sting. Every moment in that courtroom was being recorded from a small mic tucked into his jacket lapel. The DOJ had agents posing as journalists, interns, even janitors in the courthouse. But today, a moment Judge Aldridge uttered those words, Caleb felt something twist in his chest. Not from fear, from rage. Controlled, patient, cold. "Answer me, boy," Aldridge barked again, "or I'll hold you in contempt." Caleb finally spoke, his voice calm, measured. "Yes, Your Honor." Aldridge smirked. "That's better." While Jensen leaned over, whispering, "Don't antagonize him. He'll throw the book at you." "I'm counting on it," Caleb replied, just loud enough for Lyle to hear. The attorney blinked, confused, but said nothing. The hearing proceeded. It was a simple procedural matter. Judge Aldridge had already denied Caleb's bail 2 weeks prior, despite his clean record and community ties. The prosecution, led by Assistant DA Sandra Bellows, presented a motion to introduce questionable body cam footage. The defense objected. The judge overruled. Standard operating procedure for Aldridge. But things changed when Sandra Bellows leaned in to whisper something to the judge, something that made his expression shift. For the first time, Aldridge looked uneasy. Caleb noticed. Every muscle in Aldridge's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists against the bench. "Court is adjourned until Thursday at 10 a.m., the judge muttered abruptly, standing and storming into his chambers. The gavel didn't even fall. Jensen turned to Caleb, baffled. "What the hell just happened?" Caleb stood. "I think you just found out who I really am." Back in Washington, Agent Elena Park watched the live feed end. She turned to the room of DOJ officials, all of them silent. "He broke protocol," one of them said. "No," she answered. "He struck gold." The DOJ had been chasing Judge Aldridge for years. Civil suits had failed. Whistleblowers had been silenced. But now they had footage, direct evidence. Not just the racial slurs, those alone were damning, but also proof of case manipulation, illegal detentions, and conspiracy with law enforcement. It was the beginning of the end. Back in Mississippi, Caleb didn't return to jail. Instead, he was quietly relocated to a safe house outside of Jackson, where he changed out of his prison uniform and into a tailored navy blue suit. Clean shave, polished shoes, a badge once again visible at his hip. The next time he stepped into the courthouse, he wasn't a defendant. He was the lead witness. And Judge Aldrich? He didn't see it coming. Not until the doors burst open at 9:02 a.m. the next morning, and a U.S. Marshal handed him a sealed indictment. You're under investigation for civil rights violations, judicial misconduct, and obstruction of justice. The color drained from the old judge's face. You can't be serious, he hissed. You don't know who I am. Caleb stepped forward. Actually, sir, he said, with a faint smile, I know exactly who you are. The courtroom erupted. For a man who'd spent decades lording over a courtroom, Judge Burton K. Aldrich looked disturbingly small in handcuffs. The cameras were waiting just outside the courthouse steps as federal agents led him down through the stone colonnade. News crews jostled for angles. A young reporter from Jackson local news yelled, Judge Aldrich, do you deny the accusations? But the old man kept his eyes fixed ahead, lips clamped shut. Inside, Caleb remained in the hallway, away from the spectacle. He didn't need to see Aldrich fall. He already had. The fight wasn't over, not even close. 2 weeks earlier, the DOJ had received a whistleblower report from someone inside the district clerk's office. Hundreds of sealed case files, nearly all involving Black or Latino defendants, had been lost or accidentally destroyed under Aldrich's administration. Some of the defendants had vanished, shed no trace of release, parole, or transfer. The suspicion, a private prison pipeline. The judge had allegedly been receiving kickbacks from a local facility for sentencing men to extended terms, especially those charged with non-cooperative behavior. Caleb's undercover work had been intended only to gather audiovisual evidence of racism in sentencing. Now, it had uncovered something darker. That evening, Caleb stood before a panel of senior DOJ attorneys, his case folder thick with names, dates, recordings. He's not just a racist dinosaur clinging to a bench, Caleb said, voice low but charged. He's part of a money machine built on human lives. Attorney General Maddox, a stern woman with steel gray hair and a reputation for ice-cold efficiency, folded her hands. We'll authorize expansion of the task force. You'll lead it. This is no longer about one judge, it's about the entire system in Jackson County. Caleb nodded once. He'd known this might happen. He had hoped it would. The headlines over the next few days painted a damning portrait. Mississippi judge arrested in DOJ sting. Federal agent posed as defendant to expose racial abuse in court. Private prison ties emerge in civil rights probe. Some of the coverage was celebratory, some skeptical. Conservative outlets tried spinning Caleb as an infiltrator who manipulated the judicial process for political gain. Social media exploded. Half the country seemed to hail him as a hero. The other half called him a traitor. He ignored both. The work ahead mattered more than opinions. By Friday, Caleb was back in Jackson, this time not as a ghost, but a man in the open. He met with state auditors, former inmates, frightened clerks who had once feared retaliation. Each meeting opened a new wound. A young black man named Jerome Fields had been sentenced to 15 years for assaulting a police officer after a white deputy claimed Jerome had shoved him during a traffic stop. No body cam footage. No eyewitnesses. He'd served 9 years already. Caleb visited Jerome's mother. She opened the door in silence, stared at Caleb, and simply said, I prayed God would send someone. I didn't expect it to be a man in handcuffs. He stayed 2 hours, but the system wasn't going to collapse without a fight. On the morning of the federal grand jury hearing, Judge Aldridge's attorney, a slick Washington transplant named Dwight Ramsey, delivered a fiery press conference, accusing the DOJ of staging a politically motivated sting operation and claiming Aldridge had no knowledge of any kickback scheme. Caleb watched it live from the back of a quiet office. Same old strategy, he muttered. Deny, deflect, dehumanize. You ready for this? Agent Elena Park asked, leaning against the doorway with a cup of black coffee. Caleb turned toward her, eyes calm. I was ready before they cuffed the first innocent man in that courtroom. They drove together to the courthouse under federal protection. A crowd had gathered outside, activists, protesters, and counter-protesters flanked by local police. Signs read "Justice for Jackson," "End legal slavery," and disturbingly, "Aldridge is innocent." The hearing room was full. Press lined the walls. A panel of 12 jurors sat in silence. Caleb took the stand. He recounted every moment how the sting was initiated, how Aldridge's courtroom operated with open hostility toward people of color, how the judge had overruled legal precedent and made demeaning personal comments during trials. Then he introduced the audio. The room tensed as the playback began. You people never know your place. Gasp. A woman in the jury clutched her chest. Sit down, counselor. Don't try to teach me how to run my courtroom. Click. Pause. Caleb leaned in. This was a bail hearing. No record. No legal justification. Just open contempt. Then came the records, the sealed files, the manipulated sentencing reports, the private prison referral logs obtained through a cooperative source at the facility itself. A trail of numbers. Transfers. Money. Some jurors looked sick. When he stepped down, silence followed. Then the sound of one person clapping slow, steady. From the gallery, Jerome Fields, freshly released. Caleb's throat tightened. But Aldridge wasn't done. The former judge, now stripped of his robes, but still filled with venom, stood on the other side of the courtroom. You think this is justice? He barked. A black man pretending to be a criminal just to set me up? That's not law. That's entrapment. The prosecutor objected. But Caleb, before leaving the room, turned back and said one sentence. You didn't need my help to incriminate yourself, Judge. You've been doing it for 40 years. The grand jury returned an indictment within 48 hours. 12 counts. Civil rights violations. Racketeering. Conspiracy. Money laundering. Judge Aldridge was denied bail. The DOJ task force widened. In the next 6 weeks, for assistant prosecutors, 2 prison officials and 1 sheriff were also indicted. 27 past convictions were overturned. More than 50 cases were reopened. And Caleb? He stayed. He refused reassignment, refused media interviews. Every time someone tried to frame him as a national symbol, he redirected the spotlight. This isn't about me, he said during one reluctant interview. It's about how easily justice can be twisted when no one's watching. But justice has scars. Late one night, Caleb sat alone in his motel room, watching footage of the original court day on repeat, hearing Aldridge's voice again, seeing the sneer, the word boy. His mind wandered to his father, a schoolteacher who once marched in Selma and told him stories of being spat on during integration. I thought maybe, his father had once said, we'd left that all behind. Caleb knew better now. You don't leave behind something you never dismantled. You bury it. You pretend it's gone, but waits. And sometimes it wears a robe. He stood, pulled on his coat, and walked into the Mississippi night. Crickets chirped. The town was quiet. But behind closed doors, things were changing. Policies rewritten. Positions vacated. Truths uncovered. One man had cracked the door. Now others were walking through it. 3 months passed. The federal case against Judge Aldridge moved into full swing, but the deeper Caleb and his team dug, the more grotesque the web became. This wasn't just about prejudice. It was profit. Pain turned into revenue. Sentencing converted to shareholder returns. One day, in late October, Agent Elena Park walked into Caleb's temporary office with a manila envelope in her hand and a ghost of nausea in her expression. "We just got these back from the DOJ's data recovery team. They managed to retrieve the hard drive from the old courthouse, system-sealed records, backdoor transcripts, bench notes. Some of the files are disturbing." Caleb opened the envelope, brows furrowed. The first name on the list made his stomach clench. Andre Holloway. He remembered that name. A teenager, 17 at the time of arrest, charged with armed robbery for allegedly stealing a bottle of liquor and $40 from a convenience store. He'd had no weapon, no prior offenses. The owner of the store had later recanted his accusation in a handwritten letter, but the judge never admitted it into evidence. Aldridge sentenced Andre to 20 years without parole. The transcript showed what wasn't in the public record. "You kids think the world owes you something. I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll remember in your bones." Caleb's fist curled on the desk. "Where is he now?" Elena hesitated. "He died in Wilcox Correctional 2 years ago, stabbed in a lunchroom fight he wasn't part of." Caleb leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to breathe past the weight in his chest. These weren't just abuses. They were human lives burned as fuel for power, for ego. And it wasn't just Aldridge. The documents named at least 5 judges, 12 prosecutors, a handful of court-appointed defense attorneys, all linked through a pattern of cooperation, favors, and silence. They called it the bench circle in their encrypted chats. Their motto: keep the pipeline flowing. One message, dated 2018, read, "Send him to Wilcox. They're offering $500 a head this quarter. Make it stick." It was signed D.A. Thomas Rutledge, the current district attorney. That changed everything. They weren't just pursuing the past now. They were in the middle of something still alive. Caleb called a closed-door meeting with DOJ leadership. "We need a federal task force on site. Full authority. Grand jury, witness protection, resource transfers. This isn't an old crime. It's active conspiracy." The AG agreed. Within 72 hours, the town of Jackson found itself surrounded. Agents swarmed the DA's office, the sheriff's department, and the courthouse records room. People panicked. Clerks disappeared. One assistant prosecutor attempted suicide. She left a note saying she'd signed things she didn't understand, but now she did. Public defenders began cooperating. Former inmates stepped forward. The local black community formed a legal defense fund. Civil rights organizations descended on Mississippi with teams of lawyers, media experts, and forensic accountants. And through it all, Caleb moved like a blade, through darkness relentless, focused. But the backlash came. One morning, as Caleb opened his motel room door, he found a noose hanging from the handle. Inside the loop, a small folded note. "Jackson cleans its own." He didn't flinch. He didn't even report it. But later that evening, Agent Park noticed something had changed in his voice. A steel had replaced the measured calm. "They're scared," he said, "and scared men make mistakes." That mistake came in the form of a recording. An anonymous file sent to the DOJ to plenty of scratchy audio track, barely audible, time-stamped 4 years prior. It featured a meeting between Judge Aldridge and D.A. Rutledge. Aldridge's voice was unmistakable. "I want that kid buried." He looked me in the eye like he thought he was better than me. Rutledge: "We'll make sure the arresting officer says he resisted. That'll be enough." "Good. Let's teach him where he belongs." That tape, when played during the second round of indictments, turned the courtroom into a furnace of fury. Jurors wept. A bailiff had to excuse herself. Even seasoned federal lawyers had trouble meeting Caleb's eyes. The nation was watching now. Caleb received a call from his father that night. "You okay, son?" "Doing the job. You know I'm proud of you." Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the motel parking lot, rain pelting the windshield of his rented car. "Dad, I don't think this ends with Aldrich." "No," his father replied softly, "but maybe it begins there." Meanwhile, Judge Aldridge's defense grew desperate. His attorney filed a motion to dismiss all charges, citing entrapment, media bias, and emotional manipulation by the prosecution. The motion was denied in under 30 minutes. The trial date was set January 9th, 2026. But Aldridge wouldn't make it. On December 22nd, 2 weeks before the trial, he was found unresponsive in his cell at the Federal Detention Center in Atlanta. Cause of death: stroke. No foul play. No suicide note. Just gone. Caleb sat alone when he heard the news. No satisfaction. No relief. Only the quiet weight of history taking another name off the list without letting the people speak. At the funeral, only 5 people attended. No family. No friends. No legacy. But his death didn't end the case. The federal prosecutors pressed forward with the rest of the bench circle. D.A. Rutledge was arrested in early January. 3 other judges recused themselves and entered plea negotiations. The DOJ filed civil rights violation claims against Wilcox Correctional and revoked its contract. And on March 17th, 2026, exactly 1 year after Caleb walked into the Jackson courtroom in chains, the Supreme Court approved emergency measures mandating outside review of all sentencing procedures in counties with racial disparity indexes above 25%. Jackson County ranked at 62%. The final chapter came at a town hall meeting held in the same courthouse where Aldridge had once ruled. Caleb didn't want to speak, but when the mayor asked and the crowd chanted his name, he stood. "I didn't come here to expose one man," he said. "I came to expose a system that lets men like him thrive. I came to show that justice isn't blind, it's not even asleep. Sometimes it's complicit." He paused. "But the good news is we don't need justice to wake up. We need to replace it. With people. With conscience. With courage." A standing ovation followed. But he didn't stay to enjoy it. He left quietly, as always. Outside, he looked up at the courthouse columns, still stained with the same rain as the day he was first humiliated there. This time, he wasn't the man in the prisoner's uniform. He was the one who brought the gavel down. Spring returned to Mississippi. Not with fanfare, not with triumph, but with slow, steady change. Jackson County Courthouse, once ruled by a judge who carved out injustice in broad daylight, was now undergoing renovations. Caleb stood across the street, watching bricklayers at work. His hands were deep in the pockets of a light trench coat, the collar turned up against the wind. His face, once familiar to the town as a troublemaker, now carried weight familiar, respected, but still solitary. "Funny how long it takes to tear something down," said Elena Park beside him, sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup. Caleb smirked. "It's easier to destroy lives than it is to rebuild trust." She didn't respond at first, just looked up at the building and said, "They're asking us to testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee next month. You and me. The Aldridge case is now the central focus of their national oversight hearing." Caleb looked away from the courthouse. "I don't want to be a symbol, Elena." "You're not. You're a witness. People need to hear it from you." He didn't answer, but he didn't say no either. Weeks passed. In the towns and cities across the South, headlines shifted. Inspired by the Aldridge scandal, new investigations opened in Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana. Former judges were quietly resigning. Prosecutors were cooperating. For the first time in years, statistics of disproportionate sentencing began to fall. But the wounds took longer. Families of victims still sat at empty dinner tables. Mothers still wept in courtrooms that once ignored them. Men and women returned home from prison to find the world had moved on without them. One of those men was Malik Rayford, sentenced at age 21 to 10 years for assaulting an officer after trying to break up a fight at a gas station. His case was one of the first Caleb had flagged. Now 31, Malik returned to Jackson with nothing but a plastic bag of state-issued clothing and a file folder with his release papers. Caleb met him outside the halfway house. "You came," Malik said, blinking in the sun. "Didn't think anybody would." "I said I would," Caleb replied. He handed him a pair of new sneakers and a phone. "You're not alone." Malik took the phone slowly, eyes wide. "They ever charged the cop?" Caleb shook his head. "Not yet, but we're not done." In April, the Senate hearing aired nationwide. It lasted over 6 hours. Caleb sat at the witness table, the seal of the United States behind him, the nation watching. His statement, though only 8 minutes, was replayed for days. "I stood in that courtroom wearing chains, but I wasn't the one shackled by fear. It was the man behind the bench who was terrified. Terrified that his power could be questioned, that the truth could undo everything he'd built on prejudice and profit." He paused. Justice doesn't wear a robe. It wears the face of every person brave enough to say no more. The chamber went silent. Some senators wiped their eyes. Others simply looked down, ashamed. When the session ended, Caleb exited through the side corridor and walked the marble hallway toward the elevators. A tall black man in his 50s stood waiting. He wore a gray suit, polished shoes, and a badge pinned discreetly beneath his lapel. "Agent Monroe," the man said. Caleb nodded. "I'm Raymond Holt, Civil Rights Division. I started in 1987, marched with Johnny Cochran, testified in the Ferguson Review, watched too many cases rot before they saw daylight." He extended his hand. "You did something we couldn't. You lit a fire they couldn't ignore." Caleb accepted the handshake. "We just exposed it. Now we have to keep it from burning the whole country down." Raymond chuckled. "Then maybe it's time you come work from the inside." "We're restructuring the department," Raymond continued. "Not just lawyers. We need field minds, agents who know both sides of the wall, who aren't afraid to step into the fire." Caleb didn't respond right away. Then, give me a week. Back in Jackson, the courthouse doors reopened under new leadership. A young black judge named Avery Lane was sworn in. At her first session, the entire gallery stood. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. Her first act? Reversing 37 unjust sentences. Among them, Jerome Fields, Malik Rayford, and Mariana Sanchez, a woman deported illegally after being denied an interpreter in Aldridge's courtroom. Caleb sat quietly in the back row. No badge, no speech, just a man watching the scales tilt ever so slightly toward balance. One morning, Caleb walked the path behind his motel, the same one he used to pace when preparing for trial. The trees were greener now, or maybe his eyes just saw them clearer. His father called again that evening. "You headed back to D.C.?" "Maybe," Caleb said. "Don't forget who you are, son." "I won't." His father was quiet for a while. Then, "You remind me of your grandfather. He fought to sit at a lunch counter. You sat in a courtroom. Different chairs." Caleb smiled. "Thanks, Dad." A week later, Caleb flew to Washington. He didn't bring much, just a single suitcase and a folder of names still waiting for justice. At the Civil Rights Division, he sat in the glass office overlooking the Capitol and signed his new title, Senior Investigator, DOJ Independent Oversight Unit. First mission, review of prison labor contracts nationwide. Second, oversight on AI surveillance used in low-income districts. Third, Jackson County follow-up audits. The work didn't stop, but neither did he. 1 year to the day After Judge Aldridge called him boy, Caleb returned to that same courtroom. This time, he wasn't pretending. He stood beside Judge Lane as she announced a new initiative. The Monroe Project, a nationwide program to review sentencing disparities using both AI-assisted audits and human field agents embedded in county systems. The crowd clapped. Journalists scribbled. Families of the wrongly convicted held photos of loved ones beside candles lit for those who didn't survive long enough to see freedom. Caleb stepped up to the podium. "This isn't my story," he said. "It's our story. It's every man and woman who was silenced, dismissed, and buried by the same system meant to protect them. This project isn't about vengeance. It's about truth. And truth, no matter how long it's buried, has a way of rising." Outside, as he walked toward the car waiting for him, someone called out, "Agent Monroe." He turned. It was a little black boy, maybe 8 years old, holding a notebook and a nervous smile. "Can I shake your hand?" the boy asked. Caleb knelt, extended his hand, and asked, "What's your name?" "Micah," the boy replied. "You want to be an agent one day?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir. I want to be a judge." Caleb grinned. "Then you'll be a damn good one." As the sun dipped over the courthouse, Caleb Monroe stepped into the car and closed the door. Behind him, Jackson County stood a little taller, and the man once humiliated in chains had become the architect of a new justice, one built not on fear, but on truth. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.